Hello and welcome to the Flashtronauts, where we explore the ever-expanding universe of flash fiction. Tonight we'll be discussing the art of brevity, crafting the very short story by Grant Faulkner. This was published in February of 2023 by the University of New Mexico Press. So I'll just jump right in. We'll start talking about Grant. Grant Faulkner is the executive director of National Novel Writing Month, also known as NaNoWriMo, and the co-founder of 100 Word Story. His work has been widely anthologized in flash fiction collections, and he is the author of several other books, including All the Comfort Sin Can Provide, Fissures, and Nothing Short of 100 Selected Tales from 100 Word Story. You may also know Grant from the weekly podcast Right Minded, a weekly inspiration for writers that he hosts with Brooke Warner. So I'm going to jump right in. As you can see, I've dog-eared a lot of pages and put notes in there and paper clips. And I'm just going to read the things that really jumped out and spoke to me. So they may not be connected or they may connect. We'll just open up and see. I'll share some nuggets with you. But what I really like about this, first off, is that, and in his introduction, he says that it's not really a craft book necessarily. Oh, yeah. Okay. So in his introduction, this isn't a craft book so much as it is a meditation on the aesthetic of brevity as it's used in many different forms of art, but with a special focus on flash fiction. And I will say that he ends each chapter with a writing prompt, which is great. And he has a lot of quotes from flash writers on flash fiction in the back and actually throughout. And what I really liked about this book is he encourages you as a reader that you don't have to go from the front to the back, that you can skip around as things and speak to you as the chapters speak to you, which is how I generally read craft books anyway. So that was refreshing to be given permission to read it like that. So some of the chapter names: 13 Ways of Looking at Flash Fiction, The Freedom of Constraints, The Erotics of Brevity, Telling a Story in Fragments, Plotting in Miniature, Writing Characters in Fleeting, The Sounds of Silence, Go Small, Going Small to Go Small, Story as a Collage, Found Objects, the sentence, the paragraph, the title, endings. So he covers a lot of form in this, and also different elements, I guess, of flash fiction that I really like, that he thinks this of the importance of. I'm tripping over my words tonight, sorry. I have a lot to say. Rhythm, spatiality, texture, tone, voice. He asks the question, what are the elements of a story that matter? And he also talks about omission a lot. And of course, if you're watching this, I'm sure you're familiar with flash fiction. You probably are. And that omission is a big part of flash fiction, is how much you take away. You know, how much can you take away of a story and have it still be a story? And the silent spaces, the blank spaces, what is subtext and what is not said, which he covers. So we will just jump right into it. Still in his introduction, Grant says, Flash is a type of border crossing into a different land of storytelling, especially the shorts of the world of microfiction, which are generally known as stories less than 400 words. Flash allows stories to capture the running water of every day. Suddenly, the strain of music heard faintly from the next apartment becomes the reason for a story. Brevity allows us to get close to the unsayable, to know something that is beyond words or the wordless moments words bring us to. If I trip up a lot tonight, it's because I have a babysitter with my kids for just a limited amount of time. And so I want to make sure I get everything in that I need to tonight. He says life isn't round, a complete circle. It's shaped by fragments, shards, and pinpricks. It's a collage of snapshots, a collection of the unspoken, an attic full of situations you can't get rid of. The brevity of Flash is perfect for capturing the small but telling moments when life pivots almost noticeably, yet profoundly. That is so true. There is a feeling in flash fiction, good flash fiction, where, and I think a lot of people who are new to flash may not understand flash. Like my mom, she's still learning about flash fiction and reading it, and there's a lot of times she'll ask me what the story means or where's the ending. It doesn't seem like it ends for her, I think, because in traditional stories, novels, we're given an ending. We're told how the story ends and what to think about it. But in flash fiction, it's often left up to the reader, and Grant discusses that. In most flash fiction, there is a moment when life pivots for the characters. Things change, almost unnoticeably, yet profoundly. I love that. And here's a quote from Jane Ann Phillips. It says, "The words of the last line should create a silence, a white space in which the reader breathes. The story enters that breath and continues." And that's also bringing in the importance of the reader for them to bring in their experiences and their interpretations into a story. And here's a good one too. The short form requires a deeper humility from the writer. You're writing not to draw attention to yourself, as some works do with verbal flourishes or stylistic panache, but to serve the story in all of its nuances, searching for exactly the right word to work in such a tiny space. A short exists on a different plane. True, true, true. Then he does discuss a little bit about, that argument that flash fiction is popular because people have less attention spans or shorter attention spans, and he counters that. And he says, a well crafted short demands not to be read quickly, but to be read multiple times with the attention one brings to a poem. Flash stories aren't meant to serve short attention spans, just like haikus weren't meant to serve a short attention span. Quite the opposite. You could say that flash prolongs perception and causes you to pause. Flash actually cuts through distraction and holds the possibility of returning the reader and yourself as a writer to a more focused and intense reading experience. Yes, I agree. I know as I was reading this, I was nodding my head a lot, just agreeing. It was so nice to be validated on some thoughts that I've had about flash fiction that maybe I haven't really heard or discussed, or at least not in length. And Grant goes over that because, I was going to say that when I teach flash fiction or talk about flash fiction to people, I often say it's easy to define because it's a short fiction of less than 1,000 words, but it really can be hard to describe. And there's so many different descriptions for it, and there's so many different things you can do with it. And he does address that in here too. I think he has a quote that says something like that. I'm sure I'll get to it, but it's really hard. It's which makes it so wonderful to me because of the things that it can do. And I just love it. It says, perhaps there are so many ways to describe flash fiction because of the many things it does. So this whole book is like an ongoing description of flash fiction. It's like one big long description and of what it can do, because it's really hard to nail down. And Grant says here, the beauty of a firefly's light is not how it illuminates the world as the sun does, but in how it illuminates the darkness. Sometimes it takes the smallest of things to open up the biggest spaces. Here in chapter 2, the freedom constraint. The freedom of constraint. He talks about when he was learning to write flash fiction for himself. He said he found out that to tell a story to the essence of a story, he didn't have to excavate all of its layers or provide connective tissue and explanation. He learned that more isn't necessarily the direction to go in to tell a full story. And I had a similar experience with that with discovering flash fiction. Well, I've always written short stories, short stories, around 1,000 words. But I didn't know, the term when I first started. And this is back in the 90s and the early 2000s. And I remember having that moment where I was trying to write longer because in the workshops I was in, they always made me feel like I needed to write a longer short story because they just didn't know what a short was. So I felt like, okay, I have a story here. I need to find ways to pad it out and find ways to make it fuller and to make it bigger. So I had these scenes, and then I was trying to find what he says, like the connection, the tissues between them to link these stories together. I had to write what I thought was boring parts in between the exciting parts. And so I felt like it was just going like this, and it was just boring, these connective tissues. So I just had the epiphany one day to cut those connective tissues out and just use the exciting parts to me. And it read like a story, and it was a story, and it is a story. But it's nice, and it was nice for me to find out later along that that's what flash fiction is, and that he had similar thoughts and similar revelations, which many of us have. I'd like to ask more flash writers, or if you're on here and you want to comment about how you came to flash fiction, did you have a similar way that you came to it, where you just decided that, I'm not going to pad things out just because I think I should? Anyway, he talks about form as a straitjacket, and this is a quote from a writer, Paul Muldoon, who says, "Form is a straitjacket in the way that a straitjacket was a straitjacket for Houdini." A straitjacket wasn't truly a straitjacket for Houdini. It was a space that forced him to explore his body in different ways, to realize different possibilities for movement. Some say I do it this way, others say I do it that way, but I say I do it the other way, said Houdini. When writing within a tight constraint, you have to look for the other way to do it. The erotics of brevity. I underlined a lot here. Writing's purpose is often meant to explain the oblique to resolve. Writing's purpose is often meant to explain the oblique to resolve, but the oblique is one purpose of flash. Flash is the arch of the sidelong glance. Desire forms itself around the ambiguous, those feints and teases that keep us captivated by the mere suggestion of future fulfillment. A short is similarly erotic, the author calculating just how much and when to reveal. A good writer lures the reader from the first sentence of a story, very important. A question is posed, not answered. A good author is always allowing peeks into the garment, but doesn't strip off the clothing, or doesn't do so until exactly the right moment. One of the pleasures of reading this book is not only the nuggets and the thoughts that he's saying, but I just really like Grant's writing in general. It's just beautiful, and he says things in just the right way, I think. And then he goes on to say, it's like playing with a cat with a string. If you dangle a piece of string in front of a cat, it will try to catch the yarn over and over again, even as the string slides through its paws. But when you stop, the cat loses interest and wanders away. Every paragraph you write is like the string you tease the cat with. Then in plotting, it says the short form is an invitation to question the definition of plot. That is for sure. This is a quote from Robert Olin Butler. A short story in its brevity may not have a fully developed plot, but it must have the essence of a plot yearning. That's the end of the quote. And then Grant says, yes, yearning, not a series of plot points that map to a structure, but a yearning, a restlessness that takes a story from one moment to another with uncertainty lacing itself through the prose. In the chapter, The Sounds of Silence, silences contain subtext, and the subtext of silence is a breeding ground for stories. And then connected to plot and omission and how short can you go, He says a flash writer might want to tell the story of just the chair in a room, or perhaps the chair itself, or perhaps just one of the chair's legs. Instead of grounding, a writer might want to disorient, to convey little or even nothing about the story world, to be grasping about for clues in the darkness. To read such pieces, especially miniatures, you have to adjust your gaze, put on a different mental lens. You have to allow for incoherence and distortion and disconnections. You have to give up your expectations of what a story is supposed to be. And I think that goes to like my mom not understanding flash fiction necessarily is you have to be willing to not have all the information given to you. So you have to bring something to the story and also be able to think beyond when the story ends. And oh, he talks about that in the chapter, oh, how short can you go? So he says, like, okay, the famous story, the six-word story by Ernest Hemingway, which is attributed to him, whether or not it was him, I don't know. For sale, baby shoes, never worn. And Grant says when Carmen Maria Machado teaches flash fiction, she always starts with the story because of the seemingly infinite number of interpretations the story can inspire. She says it can be a tragedy for Grant's interpretation and mine also, but it can easily be a comedy if the baby was born with absurdly large feet. She's heard interpretations that included alien abductions, ghosts, wormholes, parallel universes, infant eating cribs, and a fairy who stole the baby and left a changing child in its place. The lesson is that a shorter story spawns more possibilities. A six-word story is essentially a prompt for the reader's imagination, a call to pause and allow yourself to create your story in tandem with the author, which I think is so neat. But yeah, so maybe flash fiction takes a while getting used to for some people to read and to understand. Because I know my mom has asked me, I keep going back to her, but she will read a story of mine and she'll say, so after she read it, so what happened? Or what's next? And I keep telling her, well, what do you think happens? Or what do you want to happen next? And so maybe it's a hard adjustment for people, but it's something that I love about flash fiction. I love that you have to use your imagination. And as he says, it's a prompt for the reader's imagination, a call to pause and allow yourself to create your story in tandem with the author. That's what I love about it. One more quote I want to read from the back. This is on empty spaces. It's a quote from Robert Scotolaro. I hope I pronounced that right, Robert. And actually, it's a quote within a quote. But Robert says, when one is writing with so few words, there are many empty spaces. Spaces a reader can fill selectively, a Rorschach, as you say, perhaps. This is a quote I like a lot and I think applies here by Andrew Wyeth. I prefer winter and fall. When you feel the bone structure of the landscape, something waits beneath it. The whole story doesn't show. End quote. Often with very brief works of fiction, the reader imagines what might lie beyond those narrow borders. I think that's beautiful too, that the whole story doesn't show like a bone underneath the snow. I love it. So anyway, you'll want to get this book if you don't have it already. You'll want to get it if you're teaching flash fiction for sure. If you're interested in flash fiction and learning more, or if you're like me, just love flash fiction and just want to read everything you can about it. So that's The Art of Brevity, Crafting the Very Short Story by Grant FAULKNER. And I did ask Grant a few questions on email and he answered. And so I'm in my mom's closet. As it gets darker, you can see her clothes. I'm not usually in here, but this is the space I had tonight that was quiet. So I asked Grant, I said, what are you working on next? And he says, I'm always working on several things at once. I just finished a story based on my friend Gail Butinsky's photos of her road trips in the Southwest, vignettes to each photo that are linked into a larger story. I'm just about to begin a nonfiction book about rejection. The way we respond to rejection determines who we are as people and writers. I'm going beyond the typical advice to have a thick skin and probing the psychological research on rejection in author stories so that readers can develop a rejection mindset. And then I have an epistolary novel, The Letters, which is ready for submission. I also asked him, as a form, what is the future of flash fiction? As a fiction editor, I've been seeing micros really take off. I rarely see stories over 700 words. Grant, do you think Flash has settled into a stricter, tighter form, or will it continue to evolve? And his answer was, stories are a protein. They're never at rest, they're always changing, and they're always unpredictable, marvelously surprising by design. So I can't possibly foresee the variety of story forms that await us. I only know that there will always be a place for small stories and big stories because humans are wired to be storytellers. That's how we make sense of this messy life. So we need all kinds of stories. Oh, before I forget, I am going to link some of his interviews that he's done in the description. He had really good interviews at JMWW and the Cleveland Review of Books, and I might be able to get a couple other ones in there. So if you want to know more about Grant and what he's doing, you can check those out. And the last question I said, is there a wine and or cheese or maybe a seltzer and a burger that pairs well when reading The Art of Brevity? And his answer was, The Art of Brevity, I'd read it in a simple place with just a single favorite beverage at hand. You don't want to have too much or anything around you or on your mind. So that's The Art of Brevity. Check it out, and thank you for tuning in. I thank you for watching all the way through if you made it this far. Thank you and have a good night.